Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar, Influencing High Net Worth Individuals on Social Media. My name is Jennifer Grazel, and I lead the Financial Services Vertical globally at LinkedIn. We're very excited to share and discuss evolving trends among high net worth investors and the implication that leads for wealth management and retail institutions. We have a fantastic lineup of experts to discuss these emerging trends, the resulting implications, and some best practices adopted by advisors and wealth management firms. But before we get into the webinar, I have just a few housekeeping items. The webinar will last about 60 minutes total, including around 5 to 10 minutes at the end for questions from the audience. Also, your phone lines are muted by default, but you can use the Q&A box on the right of your screen to ask any questions. And we will be answering questions at the end. After the webinar, you'll receive an email with a link to the PowerPoint deck, the white paper, and a recording of the webinar. So you can review any slides and rewatch the webinar at your own leisure. Also, for those of you on Twitter, feel free to follow us at LinkedIn Marketing, that's LinkedIn MKTG, where you can also send any questions about the research. So feel free to join us once again on Twitter. All right, let's get into today's webinar. We're extremely fortunate to have this esteemed panel of experts who have deep insight and practice supporting wealth management community. Stephen Miao, who is Casina's founder and CEO, is a trusted advisor to the world's leading financial service firms, and has earned the status by providing forward-looking and pragmatic advice in regards to strategy, product, and distribution issues. Under Stephen's leadership, Casina has helped asset management and insurance leaders answer these two questions. What will the future look like? What do we need to do to stay ahead? Bill Sullivan is also joining us, and he's the global head of Capgemini's Financial Services Marketing Intelligence Group, who have published several esteemed reports, two which I heavily utilize, the Global Wealth Report and the World Retail Banking Report. And last but not least, Jennifer Openshaw, a nationally known expert in wealth management, a MarketWatch columnist, and an author of a book that was released last December, The Socially Savvy Advisor. So for now, I'd like to turn over this session to Stephen, who will be moderating a conversation around the future and high net worth investors. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Jennifer. It's a pleasure to be here today with all of you and with the distinguished panel of Jennifer and Bill. So would like to briefly introduce the topic and talk about the high net worth individuals and how the digital demand is really growing for them. So starting out with really, as most of you have experienced and are seeing, is that the global high net worth investor wealth went up by 13.8%. And as you can see, it's an annualized growth of 6.9%. So continuing to be strong, wealth expected to surpass 6.4 trillion by 2016. So a very important segment for a lot of financial services companies and a big target that most organizations are trying to capture. As you can also see, and this is clear from how the world is growing and how the world is expanding, the largest high net worth segment still is in the United States. But as you can see, in the coming years, there are other countries where the growth is really going to be. So we're looking at countries like such as China, Russia, Singapore, etc., where there's going to be tremendous growth in that segment. So also there's strong demand from the digital side in the wealth relationships. 57% of the high net worth investors are now considering their entire or most of the current wealth management relationships to be digital, which is an increase of 64% in 5 years. And you can see that there's slight differences in markets, right? The Asia Pacific market outside of Japan has the highest current as well as future digital usage, but all of the countries are way over 50%, which is really what makes this an exciting proposition for organizations to connect through the digital channel. At this point, I would like to bring in the other panelists, and Bill, maybe you can talk a little bit about how, from your research, the under 40s have high digital demands for all interactions, and you could maybe talk about how that differs amongst the over 40s and under 40s, and talk about the various areas.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Stephen. I think we found some really interesting insights coming out of our World Wealth Report last year, where we focused a deep dive on the role that digital plays in wealth management. And I think for many years there's been a bit of a hesitancy in terms of people generally understanding, do high net worth individuals want to interact digitally? It's such a huge relationship-based industry, and many advisors continue to say, my clients want to speak with me. They don't want to access information online. And I think what we found, in those first few slides that Stephen shared is it's clear that already high net worth individuals believe that over half of their wealth relationship is already performed digitally. And one of the things in this slide is we looked at 3 different areas. The informing type capabilities, so getting information, accessing research, looking up accounts. Then we looked at engaging, so that's more of your relationship-based activities, and then transacting. And not surprisingly, informing and transacting had the highest levels of digital interaction to date. Engaging was a little bit lower, but what you can see here, and where Stephen was mentioning, is the drive towards digital, especially on those emerging channels, the mobile, the social media, the video. There's still a huge gap between those under 40 and what they're looking for and the strong demand of digital, which is actually almost the same level in terms of internet or in person. And the over 40, it's much lower. So the over 40 crowd is not quite as strong on the mobile or social media video, but it's still there. So I think that's some of the initial findings we found is digital demand is strong right now, and the emerging digital, especially around social media and video and mobile, is being driven by that under 40 crowd.
And Bill, Jennifer and Bill, what do you think we can learn from that?
I was just going to add that when you look at young millionaires, they are 4 times more likely to express interest in a blog or a tweet from advisors. And the other studies also show that, wealthy people have restructured their investments or even shifted their advisor relationships because of information that they're finding across the social media landscape. And so there's no question that the race is on in terms of who can produce relevant content, who can leverage content. And again, folks are using it not only to alter their relationships, but also to research whether it's an investment decision or maybe even the advisor they're about to hire.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a very good point, Jennifer. And so when we look at the future and we look at how the younger generation is using digital, with the increased use of mobile, social, and video, what do we expect that financial services companies need to do to be able to continue to service the over 40 segment, which obviously is still the people that hold the majority of the wealth, but really to be able to reach out to the next generation?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we're finding is, if you think about the next generation, they're growing up in the world of Amazon and Google and Apple, where they can access anything they want. They can customize it how they want. The availability of information is high, and that's actually shifting very quickly to not only the younger generations, but when you're looking at the general retail space or the retail banking space, they're already heavily using digital channels. It's probably not a big stretch to think that the role that digital is going to be playing in the high net worth space will start to move up the age brackets as people become more comfortable, as concerns around security start to drop. I think we're starting to see that. So, in the discussions we've had with our clients in terms of wealth managers, there's a huge focus right now in terms of how we need to start investing in digital and what role does digital and social play in that. So I think you're starting to see, for many years it was a bit of a wait and see or follow and catch up as opposed to being the first leader. I think we're starting to see some significant investments being made in that. And I think it's not going to be just targeting the under 40. I think it's really targeting the full spectrum, both in terms of your clients, but also enabling your advisors to have that kind of technology. I think that's equally important, is not just providing the capabilities to your clients, but also making sure that your advisors and the wealth managers have access to digital tools that can enable them to be more effective.
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
And Steve, just over the last 3-4 years, I've probably talked to about 100 companies, a lot of them global big names, and many of them were, taking sort of a wait-and-see approach, and would frankly, actively say that because they were afraid partly of, being the first, maybe making a mistake, maybe the regulatory landscape. But there's no question, as I talk about in the book, there are clearly ways to move forward. But what we're also seeing is that the independent advisors who maybe couldn't compete against the larger guys are now saying, gosh, now it's easy for me to compete. I can put my content out there. I can make myself more findable in search engines. I can engage through new channels like Instagram and YouTube. And we are absolutely seeing penetration through those channels. The other thing is that in the United States, in some of the top universities where financial planners and investment advisors are educated, they are now being taught about social media. And they're saying, if you're not on social media, you don't exist. And so this next generation is coming out, and frankly, large firms are looking to hire them because of the skills that they have, but particularly because of their desire and experience already on social media.
Yeah, what I find really interesting in the work that we're doing with our clients is that it feels like it's deja vu all over again, right? So in 1999, we spoke to our clients, which are mostly asset managers, brokerage firms, insurance companies, about the internet, right, and having a web presence. And everybody was like, oh, no, this is going to be so scary. We don't want to give people access to the internet because there's dangerous things out there, right? And of course, today we can't imagine a world without having web access on every computer and interacting with our customers. And the same thing is happening now with social again, right? I mean, we're hearing the same thing from compliance and security and people talking about how their employees will waste time. And there's still a lot of financial institutions who do not properly engage with social media.
Yes, Stephen, I think that's no, go ahead, Jennifer.
Very interesting stories. I had a young man who was being hired by a major investment management firm, and they did not him using social media. And he said, I need to be using social media in order to do my job, and they ultimately ended up hiring him. That's going to be the shift that we're going to see where chief marketing officers are now chief digital officers, where the skill set of young people who can engage not only with older people on social and younger. I also want to just mention that we've seen traditionally, and in fact in some prior research I did around networks, millionaires leverage their networks more than non-millionaires. But those networks are now moving online. If you look at places like, just to give you an example, Angels List, where high net worth people can come together around venture capital opportunities, there's no question that that's already starting to take place more broadly.
Yeah, I think that's a critical component. I think when people are talking about what role can social play and what's the real value, I think there's 2 points, but to that last point that you mentioned, the whole concept of an advisor and a core success factor of a wealth manager is their network and their ability to network and socialize. And the concept of networking and socializing in clubs is changing, and it's not the same as it was 10, 20, 30 years ago. And as people are growing up in a digital age, they network and socialize differently. So, when you talk about what social media can play, there's many different ways that social media can help you as a wealth manager, but one is certainly around the networking element.
Yep. So the previous slide just laid out how various high net worth investors are using social, essentially Facebook still being the strongest, but as you can see, the other ones, LinkedIn as well as YouTube, are very closely behind there as well. One of the things that we also found is, so even though Twitter is a very small percentage, but what's interesting is those who are on Twitter tend to be very engaged, and they do really receive as well as communicate and engage a lot more than other users. So you might have 59% of the population being on Facebook, but most of those are primarily what most firms call lurkers rather than actually engagers. So I think that's an interesting distinction to make.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's important to note.
Go ahead.
I think one of the important things to note is the evolution of how new channels evolve. And as you mentioned, Stephen, before around, you feel like you're in deja vu. I remember in 2005, I was living in Paris, and we were speaking with a Swiss private banker, and he point blank told me I was an arrogant American to think if his client was ever going to access his account and internet in the next 50 years. And, we see how that's changed. I'll guarantee that he may still have that opinion now, but, it is evolving, and I think it's changing. So, understanding these channels evolve at different levels of complexity, and they typically start in your day-to-day life in retail, then move into retail banking, and then into wealth management. Our retail banking report that we launched last year found that bank customers are interacting with their bank on social media almost as much on a weekly basis, almost as much as they go to a branch. So 10% of customers interact with their bank at least once a week through social media, whereas only 14% are going to a branch once a week. So I think we're at that very early stage of adoption, and I think banks are still trying to figure out, and wealth managers are trying to figure out how you can leverage social media effectively, and customers on the same side are trying to understand what's the value that social media can provide as it comes to their financial services relationships.
Well, Bill, that's
a good point. Why don't we move on to one of the next topics that we've talked about, and Jennifer, maybe you can shed some more light on this. So 70% of the $41 trillion in U.S. intergenerational wealth will be transferred over to women in the next 40 years. What do you think the impact will be from a social standpoint on this trend?
Well, it's huge, and what's interesting is I was in Silicon Valley building a company that was sort of the first to focus on the women's market in the early internet days, and even then, Stephen, women were especially avid users both of the internet and now today social media. We are seeing women using social media sites about 8 percentage points more than men on average, and about 3/4 of online women now use social networking sites. So we're seeing a couple key trends. One is more women are using social media. They're social creatures by habit, and they connect with people, and this is just a new, quicker, more efficient way for women to do it, who are very busy today, whether they're working or not. Secondly, we've got this huge transfer of wealth, and when you think about it, the average woman lives about 7 years longer than her husband, so this transfer of wealth is chiefly going to happen in the hands of women. And so the question that advisors and firms need to be asking themselves are they building relationships with that next generation if they want to keep the current relationship? Huge important trend that's taking place right now, and we're starting to see a lot of advisors advisors, specifically focusing on this niche market. It's not so niche really, but on the women's market through social media, because they can produce content that's relevant. At the same time, by the way, and if you shift to the next slide, you'll see women controlling about 50% of wealth, expected to shift to 2/3 by 2020. Companies are focused on this, and what they're doing is trying to increase their recruiting efforts around women advisors. A lot of studies actually show that women want certain things from their advisor relationships. They want transparency, they want to be educated, not sold a product, and social channels actually sort of foster that way of thinking, right? Information is more transparent to some extent. There's a way for them to be educated in a way that they want that to happen. So the women's market is just critical to, I think, really any company's long-term growth.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's interesting in that too is, right, in the wealth transfer is not only going to women, but also to the next generation. You know, as you can see on the slide, that we're beginning to witness one of the greatest wealth transfers in the history of the world, but also of the U.S. And in the U.S. of the $1 trillion annually that over the next 50 years are being transferred to the 77 million millennials, a generation that almost equals that of the baby boomers. So what are we seeing in regards to how advisors are reaching out to that next generation? Because as we see, 89% of the investors use their financial advisors today, and only 2% of the children will actually keep their inheritance with their parents' financial advisor. So what's the opportunity, but also what's the risk by using or not using social media?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think, you know, one of the things that wealth managers have been doing for a long time is trying to solve for that intergenerational wealth transfer, and they've done things from social networking to boot camps to different ways. And I think social media is a new way to do that. I think I've seen the 2% number. I've seen it range anywhere from 2 to 5 or 10%. But the number is, the reality is, when wealth is transferred to the children or to the spouse, it often leaves that advisor. And that's a critical component. It takes so much more to attract new assets than it does to retain existing. And I think, you know, there's a whole series, and Jennifer mentioned that before, around how you can better engage and how you can become relevant to that next generation of clients. And if you're not using digital and you're not providing digital capabilities and you're not interacting in a social way, chances are you're not going to be able to connect with that next generation.
You know, two just interesting examples there is, first off, advisors. I talked to a lot of them, and a lot of them are conducting meetings via Skype. So it can be a way of just having an introductory meeting with another family member. They are also, if you think about, you know, perhaps the parent, the older generation, a lot of them are on social media. They're on Facebook, and so there are ways of engaging with them. And then lastly, you know, tracking and following people and connecting with them when life events happen. And LinkedIn is one way that you can do that, whether it's somebody having a baby or getting married or losing somebody. There's definitely ways now that you can actually get that information more immediate and show that you care about your client, and then follow up and engage in a relationship or the next step.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we see that also in the interviews that we're doing with advisors, that they specifically are monitoring the Facebook pages of their clients' children to be able to connect on those live events, but also to ensure that they're staying on touch with them on things that are going beyond the managing of their money.
Yeah, and I think, Stephen, there's some cultural differences there as well. So, you know, I think advisors also need to be careful in how they're leveraging social media, you know, because, you know, in some countries and some demographics, the role that privacy plays is relatively high. You know, so there are some segments of high net worth individuals may feel, you know, that it's a little creepy that their advisor knows these things that are happening. You know, so I think a lot of it is around understanding the cultural differences of what your clients are expecting. I think the role or expectation that privacy has as we move into Gen Y and younger is a little bit less so, but it does certainly differ from country to country.
You know, that's a great point, Bill, and it sort of segues into this. We did some research around what do investors want from their advisors on social media. They want you to be personable, but they do not want you to share your life's personal details. In other words, tell me that you understand my needs and interests and maybe show some personality, some human side to you, but they don't care about, you know, details about your weekend or your kids or whatever. The 5 social media features that investors do want when they're choosing advisors, and actually before I mention that, let me just note that only 4% of advised social media investors are currently connecting with their advisors through social media. Only 4%. 52% want to connect with their advisors through social but cannot, either because they can't find them or they figure they're just not up there. So what is it that they do want from their advisors? They want the ability to ask questions, and being timely does matter. This is an opportunity to show, obviously, a favorable impression. They want quality in resources or information, so whether it's a substantive article or even a short insight into something that might be in the news. They want you to share your expertise and display your expertise through articles or tweets or other posts. Having a clear point of view is a way for people to set themselves apart. They care about your tone. We talked about social not being a monologue, but being a dialogue. So again, very important that you let the humanness side come through while still obviously remaining professional. And then they will be looking at your online profile, and a lack of information really just raises questions about how socially savvy are you, whether it's the completeness of your profile at a place like LinkedIn or elsewhere.
Yeah, I think that's yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Steve, if you want me to just flip to the next one, the most important interactions that matter to investors are sharing trending information or personal finance news, maybe, you know, new laws going on in your country, your state, perhaps trends in global markets. You know, what's interesting, too, related to this is that we are in a global world now, and the world of social media allows the high net worth individual to better be connected to investment opportunities overseas, and certainly that's a big demand here. They also want educational articles, perhaps that the advisor has written, and then they want instant access to things like research or white papers. So don't just share a little tidbit, but give the next step, which is a way of engaging that investor or potential client.
Yeah, and that's a great segment to segue to talking about how various financial services companies can help the advisors, right? So we see that 59% of U.S. financial advisors say that that online capabilities influence their brand perception of a firm. So it is also not only the investment performance or the services that the financial services company can showcase, but also really the capabilities that they have, because digital and social is becoming the major interaction point for the financial advisors. So as Bill mentioned, one of the leading indicators, or one of the leading industries to indicate on digital and social change has been the retail banking and payment sector, which is evolving obviously a lot faster than some of the other wealth management practices. As you can see on the slide, 10% of the banking customers note that they are already interacting with their banks via social media at least once a week. So, Bill, can you shed some more light on this, and what are some of the sort of cutting-edge, innovative things that are happening that we might be surprised about?
Sure, absolutely. You know, when people think about social media and retail banking, it's largely two things. One is there's a lot going on behind the scenes that banks are using. So they're either pushing their brand and trying to get their presence, or reacting to negative, or doing social listening. What we covered in our report was, what we're finding is there's an increasing shift to actually provide capabilities and functionalities to your clients, retail banking clients, through social media channels. And, you know, this is the stat I mentioned before is, you know, obviously we know the role of the branch is starting to decline, but, you know, we're looking at individuals interacting with social media with their bank almost as much as we're seeing in terms of branch right now. So I think it's really important to understand that. Now, if you go to the next slide after this. Go one more. We've got one more. So what we found is we've actually started to see that banks are providing the full spectrum of capability. So you're starting to, oops, we went one too many.
Sorry.
Stand 23. So yes, it looked like there's a delay. All right, I'm going to switch it back one. All right. So for this, what we're seeing is, we're actually starting to see banks who are providing their account information through Facebook. They're servicing through social media. They're providing social collaboration and transacting and account information. So you're over the last 12 to 18 months, we've actually just seen a lot of that. What we did was we interviewed over 17,000 retail banking customers across 30-plus countries, and we asked them, which areas are most important to be interacting with your bank through social media. We then interviewed over almost 150 banking executives, and we found three major trends. We found, the information gathering and servicing are aligned, so both banks and customers believe that these are important areas to be servicing through social media. But what we found was banks overestimate the role of social collaboration with banking. So gamification or GPS location services or online community forums. And, that's largely, if you think about it from a bank's perspective, that's how they can help drive top-line growth and more engagement with their customers. Right now, banking customers weren't necessarily thinking of that. But what they did highly value, that banks didn't value, was being able to transact online or through social media and being able to get account information. And surprisingly, what you may find is that North America banks were actually quite far behind in this process. So generally speaking, we're seeing most of the innovation coming out of Asia, out of Turkey, and we're increasingly starting to see elements happen in Europe, especially in Spain, with some of those more innovative banks. So if you look at, in 2012, Denizbank actually in Turkey created their own Facebook, basically their Facebook branch. So you could log into Facebook, you had your entire bank in Facebook where you could access your account information, you could apply for products, you could send money to friends through your Facebook account. All these different kind of elements, and that's starting to shift. So ING has done that, Commonwealth Bank did that in 2013, even ICICI Bank had a Facebook app in India, and only, I think it was last year, no, I guess it was December 2013, the first North American bank put the capability in place where you could transfer money through Facebook, and that was RBC. And then it moved over to Europe where BBVA and La Caixa started to provide capabilities through social media. And then most recently, I saw an announcement, it was either November or December last year, Group BPCE in France actually now allows you to send money through Twitter. So I think what Stephen's point was, the retail and then retail banking starts to foresee into the future of where other parts of the financial services industry may go. So while we couldn't imagine doing these kind of things 5 years ago in the banking industry, similarly, we need to be thinking about what's next in the wealth management industry and how the high net worth individuals want to interact through social media with their banks or with their wealth managers.
And also what our research shows is that it's not only that these are leading indicators and that these are all the things that will happen in all the other segments, but really what the point that I would like our audience to walk away from is that what these banks have done is they've said, we need to ensure that we are where our customers are. We can't change the way our customers are going to want to interact with us. So we need to ensure that we develop all various platforms to ensure that we can connect with them. And that's true for other segments of the wealth management market as well. And specifically, the brokerage world has not kept up with the pace of the way people want to interact with them, but specifically also how the next generation wants to interact with them socially as well as mobilely.
Absolutely. I think one of the key points, just one quick one, I think one of the key points is the next generation doesn't think about channels as channels. So they don't think of things as mobile or internet or social media. It's just their life. And I think it's important to understand you need to provide capabilities in their life as they know it.
That's very true. So let's talk about some winning practices. What are organizations doing? As you can see, asset managers use social media primarily still as a bullhorn. So as you can see, 85.7% use it for raising brand awareness. Only 7.1% are using it to listening to customers, 3.6% are engaging and interacting, and 3.6% are building customer advocacy. So specifically, what is the promise of social, right? And the promise of social really is the engagement, interaction part, being able to listen and being able to build customer advocacy. And most financial services organizations are still in the old paradigm of communicating and pushing out information rather than engaging. And I think that these statistics show it very clearly of the gap between what the customers are doing today online versus what the financial services organizations are comfortable in doing with their customers.
Steve, in about 100 or so meetings with asset managers, so many of them said that building their brand was their #1 purpose in using social media, and again, missing the more critical engagement aspect. The key there is that they've got this content, research, white papers, et cetera, and they simply aren't until now starting to leverage it, which is really sort of social 101 as I think of it. It's really the new metrics that firms are starting to shift to. So it's engagement, it's views, it's comments, it's downloads, it's registration to something, rather than in the old paradigm, marketers were basing their success around share of voice, for example. So those metrics are definitely starting to shift as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's an example of Putnam Investments, who is one of the leaders in the social space. Their CMO, Mark McKenna, has made that one of his priorities, as well as Bob Reynolds, who is the CEO, who is also on Twitter and LinkedIn. And what you can see here is that this wholesaler, which is the salesperson that works with the financial advisor, is using both LinkedIn and Twitter to communicate his value alongside the overall Putnam brand to be able to engage and communicate with the financial advisors. So as you can see here also, the same wholesaler is leveraging the Twitter environment as well. A few other examples of cultivating and reaching interest and credibility. T. Rowe Price retweets posts from its influencers, including selected financial planners, industry associates, executives, and members of the media as well. So a number of organizations are starting to break out and are engaging with the audience, not just broadcasting, which I think is an important differentiation. Identifying the client's needs as well as the competitive trends and sentiment analysis is important for organizations. As you can see, 89.3% are monitoring what's said about them on social media. 64% are collecting social media activity data, and 3.6% are integrating activities within their CRM. A few other examples and some other channels to look at. When you get a chance, take a look at what BlackRock has done on their YouTube channel. A number of asset managers, as well as insurers and brokers, have their own YouTube channel now, and there's thousands of views who are cleverly videos who are cleverly produced to explain some of the basics of this example of long-term investing, but they've also done a lot of really good work on helping advisors as well as investors better understand how to use and what the use of ETFs are as well. A few more examples from here from Oppenheimer on how to easily connect. And Jennifer, I think you brought up that point that advisors want to share their investment outlooks or their research, and investors are looking for that. Asset managers really can play a role in that because many advisors don't have the time to create their own research, so they would like to utilize some of the research that is shared by the asset management community. So this is a great example how Oppenheimer, both on Twitter and also other platforms, is using their market outlooks and sharing that through to the advisor community. Another good example is here on Vanguard. As you can see, they have an active Google Plus presence that makes use of online exchanges and also Hangouts that feature the Vanguard financial planners on various topics, as well as for the senior executives. And maybe while we're at that point, Jennifer or Bill, do you have a perspective on the various channels and how organization might want to use something as a Google Plus, which is not as highly utilized maybe as some of the more prominent ones like LinkedIn and Facebook?
Well, it's a great way to basically have a real-time sort of gathering, if you will. I mean, you could bring an expert or a speaker in. You could have it be an educational session on a particular investment angle or strategy, or, you know, parents and kids. We're seeing, by the way, you know, for a while, some companies have built platforms, and I've seen some new platforms leveraging social media to involve parents with their kids' savings habits and those sorts of things. And so Google Hangouts could be another way of doing those sorts of things, and then also recording some of those sessions and being able to share them through the social channels afterwards.
Yeah, and I think one of the most important elements is, you know, a lot of people think that they can, you know, stick your toe into social media and then start working in bits and pieces. I think, you know, that strategy and that approach has not necessarily succeeded in many places. One, without an objective of what you're trying to achieve, without being able to measure what you're looking for, it gets challenging. I think you get yourself in challenging situations. You know, when we talk to firms about setting up your social media strategy, there's 4 core elements that we think you have to look at before you look at which channel, which tool. It's, you know, what are your capabilities and platforms that you need to have from a technology perspective? What's the risk and governance model you need to put in place to make sure you're effectively, you know, putting the right risk allocation in place for what you're comfortable with? You need a team, a support team or mechanism to be able to oversee and support, you know, both in terms of the users as well as listening and monitoring. Because once you start putting yourself out there, you know, we've seen some of the blow-ups in terms of what happens when firms do it wrong. And then lastly, similar along the technology pieces, the data analytics, being able to leverage the big data and analyze the social data, both in terms of more macro elements around what clients are looking for, but also at the more micro level in terms of what specifically is your client looking for. I think you need to have those 4 elements in place before you start going into kind of the one-off pieces in terms of which tools you use for what. I think that feeds in, but that's kind of your next stage part of your strategy.
That's a great point, Bill, and something that in the book I talk a lot about, which is, you know, defining what your audience is. You're almost definitely not going to start on all platforms. You're probably going to start with one, and then lay out a method of doing that. There's also, by the way, a social media template, social media policy template, because a lot of people are kind of wondering, well, do we need a policy and what should it involve? It does not have to be, you know, pages and pages long. It can be fairly simple, but there's at least something for you to start with to think about who's got ownership of this, what are the platforms you're going to be on, what are some of the rules and parameters around using those platforms.
Yeah. What we find in our research and also working with clients is that the number one reason why financial service organizations are slow in adopting a lot of these things, they state the fear of compliance, right? That the SEC and the various regulators around the world are not very clear in the directive of what they should be doing. Do you feel that that's from your research, is that a real issue, or are there ways for organizations to get around that?
You know, I
think it's sorry, go ahead.
Oh, you go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely a real challenge. I think there's a real risk if you use social media wrong. There's legal compliance challenges. There's brand reputation challenges. There's a whole series of problems. And I think the reality is people who are making these decisions are still unfamiliar with what they need to do to put a process in place. So I think it's absolutely a real concern and a real challenge. But it's not a good enough excuse to say that's why we're not going to do it. I think firms need to understand They have to play in this area. They need to put a strategy in place in terms of, and they need to put a phased approach in how it is. And you need to have that risk and governance at the core to start with. But, a lot of the challenges is, you've got some very disparate technology systems. If you look at just the integration of online with wealth management firms' capabilities, trying to add another channel onto that makes it that much more complicated. And what's happening is many banks or many wealth managers are just adding the channels on as separate siloed channels. And, that's probably the worst thing you could possibly be doing, because you're going to increase the cost, increase the complexity, and truly not be able to get the full value out of social if you do that.
Yeah, I totally agree. Often what we also find is that the people that are currently running marketing do not have quite the digital, specifically the social experience. And so often organizations are using compliance as a reason to hide, to be able to, think about how they can attack this channel, because it's not something that's intuitive, and the organizations have not yet quite evolved of thinking first in those kind of channels, and are still operating in some of the more traditional ways of marketing, which obviously is something that needs to evolve.
Steve, this is one of the biggest questions, I think, still looming over it, and I spent a chunk of time with the book on it and actually worked with somebody who's a former head of compliance at Fidelity International. The bottom line is that if you have a policy and a process that is indeed a defense if something ever came up, the bigger point that people seem to miss is that, the regulators are really trying to get the bad actors, the bad guys who are ripping off people or pushing a very bad product. Those people were doing that in the old world. They could continue to do it in the new world. Social media is really just another channel of communicating the things that you have traditionally been communicating. So the key things are having a policy and a process in place, and that puts you in good stead. And then secondly is making sure that marketers are working with compliance leaders. I also spent a chunk of time around that and talked to folks from TD Ameritrade and others just to see how they were doing it. And what worked is when they really sit down with their compliance leaders and say, we're trying to do this and here's how we're going to do it. I think people are starting to understand that they can't sit back and wait, because the world is moving fast and they need to figure this out. So, we talk about this more in the book, but there are some ways to work in collaboration and to address those regulatory issues, definitely.
And our research also shows me that it's the responsibility of the marketers to continue to push and to find ways of doing this in a compliant fashion, because it's not what the regulators are going to help with, it's not going to be what the compliance people are going to help with. The compliance people need to keep the organization safe, and the safest way to keep the organization is by not doing anything. But of course, as we all know, the marketers need to find ways of interacting with customers in the way that the customers want to interact, and the data that we've shown here today makes it very clear that also for the most important segment, which are the high net worth investors, the social channels are extremely important channels to interact with on various levels.
On the slide that you're on, Steve, if we just go back to it, one of the things that Stuart Frost, who worked with me on the book, points out is that the difference between social media is that the securities laws actually will penalize folks for misstatements or omitting material fact. We all know that. And so it's pretty easy to address that, though. I mean, if you can see here by BlackRock, it's simply just providing a link as to how people can learn more or understand what the risks are behind an investment opportunity. So it's omitting things that can bury people, but they could bury people also in the old world, right, when you stop and think about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So with that, I wanted to make sure that we have enough time for some questions from the audience. There were a few already that were submitted, and I think this one is a very good one, and I'll pose that to the entire group. So what can financial advisors do to connect with that next generation? how can they use social to do that better?
I think, just this is Bill. I think a couple quick things are, it's about making a connection. I know, a lot of people ask, why is it that Next Gen doesn't use their parents' advisors when it's moved down? I think they just don't feel a connection to it. And I think if you don't provide both the relationship and the technology capabilities that they're looking for, then it's going to be very difficult to retain that wealth. So, I think, one, you need to work on the firm side to make sure your systems are in place and you're providing the capabilities. But then from a relationship perspective, you need to be able to find a way. Typically you're starting to see teams where you have older advisors bringing younger advisors into the relationship to try to connect with that next generation. But I think it really is the connection element, as well as just a general not feeling that a relationship, and then not having the technology to interact with them.
And as a follow-up question to that, maybe Jennifer, you can address that, is, what is it that drives the next generation away from their parents' advisors?
I think Bill sort of hit on it. I think it's the technology capability, because people they have short attention spans today, and they are relying on their mobile devices and social channels for information and connections. And then I think secondly, it goes back to relationships and relevancy. How am I relevant to you? And even just this last slide here, sort of a good example of that, where a young woman who is under 30 is a financial advisor, and she only uses social media to build her business, and she does it very effectively. But she's on the various social platforms that you'd expect. But an interesting one here is Pinterest, which had 70 million users in 2013. Predominantly women, and providing yet another avenue to share things on an interest level. So how can somebody have an ideal retirement? Young people want quality of life. They want financial success. They maybe have other aspects of their lives, whether it's pets or traveling or nature, whatever. Some of these other platforms provide a way to at least connect with them, but still staying with your core message, as you can see here on Pinterest. By the way, on the right side is a video, YouTube video. So what she does is interviews experts on various subjects. This one that you see here is on divorce, going through a divorce. But you can see that there's just so many topics that hit young people as well that you could address.
Bill, and there's a question from the audience in regards to how do we define high net worth?
Yep, sure. So in terms of the Capgemini definition that we've been using, it's 1 million in U.S. investable financial assets, and that would exclude your primary residence and collectibles. So it includes your investment properties, but it doesn't include your primary residence. And then we would call a ultra-high net worth individual one that would have 30 million in investable financial assets.
Yep. No, that's a very good one.
Stephen, hi, this is Jennifer from LinkedIn. A question that we often get asked is, and let's circle back in terms of content. Content is a wonderful bridge to building a strong relationship. In terms of, when you think of financial institutions, they sit on a wealth of really valuable content. And based on what we're seeing from our members, they're looking for market-timely perspectives, really insights as to, at a macro level, and then also, at a company level, what's going on. And so I guess just circling back, we're currently working on a guide around how to move from event-driven to always-on content, and then also how to balance market-timely with an editorial calendar. So it'd be great to get your perspectives, around these two issues, around always-on and market-timely. And, going back to this next generation, I believe that's really one of the key requirements, right, that they're looking at a brand and an individual advisor level. So if you can provide any thoughts there.
Yeah, absolutely. I can address it, but please, Bill and Jennifer, jump in as well. What we're seeing a lot of our asset management clients are doing, actually using the LinkedIn platform, the influencer platform, Bob Reynolds is one of them who talks a lot about not only the need for changes in retirement regulation, but also really utilizing that platform as a leader, both in talking about various investment topics, but also by lobbying the entire industry and Washington to evolve. So we're seeing a number of our clients who are using the LinkedIn platform as well as extension to their blogs to be able to talk about these various topics.
That's a really great point, Stephen, actually, about advocacy, because if you stop and think about it, everybody, for the most part, has a passion around something. And, what Bob is doing is really tapping into that issue. And so there might be other issues like related to the next generation, whether it's educating them or helping them to avoid some of the, longer-term financial insecurity and pitfall issues that we read so much about. But with a sense of a voice, that there's a purpose behind it, because that voice can really bring people to your cause. And that is another very effective way of leveraging social media. It's sort of cause marketing, right? You're seeing that in so many different ways. We're seeing it in the women's market as well around investment products, but there's so many ways to bring that cause to light and to really amplify your message and engage more people.
Yeah, there's a really great question from the audience. It says, if you hire outside help to take control of the social media channels to your company, is that a handoff process, or should we use our employees to essentially handle the engagement piece and allow the marketers to increase target or our following? I think that this is such an important question, because oftentimes organizations feel like they could just outsource the social media aspect, I think what we talked about today really is that it needs to become part of your organization's DNA. Bill or Jennifer, is something that you can address as well?
I think it's a – yep, sorry, go ahead, Jennifer.
No, just real quickly, I have a chapter literally devoted on that question, because it's a tough one. A lot of people are short on resources. I think that when it's your voice, it's really important that it comes from internal, ultimately. I mean, a firm can maybe get you going, get your processes going, help you build a bank of content, but ultimately, if you're going to be doing it on a regular basis, which is the point, I just think the people inside need to own that, and they also are more in touch with the availability of new information and things that are happening that might in the old world not have been leveraged, but could be in the new world.
Yep, I agree. I think it's really around thinking about social, not as a add-on capability. And I think that's the challenge that a lot of firms are at right now, is they're seeing it as an add-on or an extra or something maybe we should be doing, as opposed to really understanding that this is part of the way. And I think, Stephen, you mentioned it, how clients want to interact with you today. And I think they don't really look at the difference between, their mobile and the internet or social. They just know this is what I want and this is how I want it. And I think as you start getting to the heart of who you are as a firm and what you're trying to share and the relationship you're building, if you're outsourcing that, it really takes away a lot of that control. I think there's certainly tools and capability and technology that you can use. There's consulting that you can use in terms of putting a right process in place and putting your governance model in place. I'm not sure I think you can carve this out and just outsource it as wholesale, unless you're just looking to fill a small gap as opposed to really take advantage of that. And I think if that's what you're doing, it's going to put you further and further behind where the competition is moving.
Yeah, I think that those are all great comments. Bill, Jennifer, thank you so much. I want to, at this time, give it back to you, Jennifer, at LinkedIn, maybe for any closing words before we close the sessions.
Thank you, Stephen, Bill, and Jennifer. This was a fantastic session, and I know there's a number of additional questions that are coming through. So we will, everybody that attended will have access to the presentation and obviously a live, this recorded session. And in reviewing some of the questions, we can definitely provide answers. So we'll take a look at the frequently asked questions, and get back to you. I just wanted to thank all of you again for dedicating your Monday morning to talking about high net worth and the use of social, and look forward to hosting more of these later this year. Thank you.
Thank you.